Recently, British military analyst Sean Bell made comments on the current situation of attacks between Russia and Ukraine on the front line. In his article published on Sky News, Bell said that the upcoming fighting season could be the final chapter in the war between Russia and Ukraine. In anticipation of Western support for Ukraine's spring offensive, Bell said, Russia has spent the past few weeks launching one attack after another against the front lines of its forces Kiev. But progress has been limited, and despite months of fierce fighting, cities like Bakhmut have not fallen currently. Russia appears to be nearing its peak, and the rate of attacks has decreased by more than 80%. The Wagner Group was still advancing very slowly north of Bakhmut. At the same time, the Russian army was struggling to replace its losses and was short of ammunition and strategy. Recent reports also suggest that Russian forces are redeploying their troops. If that is the case, Russia is realizing that it must now move from offense to defense in preparation for the expected Ukrainian counterattack. Ukraine has also suffered heavy casualties. However, if Ukraine wants to liberate its territory, it needs to launch swift and decisive attacks to exploit the exhaustion of the Russian military. Any attack, even if successful, will eventually drain the army, and certainly will, before the liberation of all of Ukraine. However, Western military support remains fragile. There are growing signs that the supply of modern weapons is being limited or at worst, coming to an end. The West also does not want to expand the war that most believe Ukraine cannot win and Russia cannot lose. According to Bell, both sides will probably end the year in exhaustion. Maybe the front line will change but will fall into a stalemate and neither side will have enough resources, human or material, to do this take the decisive step. At that stage, the West will be faced with two choices: continue to support the protracted conflict with dwindling resources which risks helping Russia's long-term strategy, or exert pressure on Russia efforts on both sides to ensure an end to the bloodshed and to focus on the reconstruction of Ukraine. But the risk could not be higher for Ukraine, that this stage could be the first steps in the final chapter of this conflict, the top local officials said on Sunday. KYIV, March 27, Reuters. Russia is turning Ukraine's Avdiivka into a place from post-apocalyptic movies, intensifying shelling and forcing a nearly full shutdown of the frontline city. According to officials, some 2,000 civilians are left in Avdiivka, a Donetsk region city some 90 kilometers, 56 miles, southwest of the besieged Bakhmut. The city had a pre-war population of more than 30,000. The city's military administration head Vitaly Barabash said, "I am sad to say this, but Avdiivka is becoming more and more like a place from post-apocalyptic movies. The evacuation of the utility workers that were still left in the city has begun and mobile reception will be turned off soon, because there are informers of the Russian occupiers in the city," Barabash added. With Russian forces making recent gradual gains on the flanks of Avdiivka, the Ukrainian military warned last week that the city could become a second Bakhmut. On Sunday, Russian shelling targeted two high-rise buildings in Avdiivka, which is just 10 kilometers from the northern outskirts of the city of Donetsk, which has been under Moscow's control since 2014. One person was injured in numerous airstrikes on Avdiivka on Saturday, according to Ukrainian military. Russia has denied targeting civilians in the now 13-month war it has waged against its neighbor. The war, which has no end in sight, has seen thousands killed, millions displaced, and tens of Ukrainian cities nearly or partially wiped out. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told CBC on March 26 that whether China and Russia are real allies remains to be seen. His comments come days after Chinese President Xi Jinping met Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time since the war in Ukraine began. "It's clear that President Xi Jinping has put limits on demonstrating his support for Putin," Kirby said. Russia and China both have the common goal of pushing back American leadership around the world, Western leadership, and NATO leadership. So both are leveraging each other's resources to influence American leadership around the world, he added. But that remains to be seen how long this alliance will last. These are two countries that want to challenge the rules-based international order. China really has the resources and capabilities to do this, President Putin has seen. And that's why he's getting closer and closer to President Xi Jinping. Both Russia and China affirmed that their relationship is an equal bilateral relationship, cooperation and mutual benefit. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin in an interview on national television has denied the information that China will form a military alliance, at the same time affirming that the West has crossed all red lines, even dark red, when supplying weapons to Ukraine. That's what they're doing, the leader said. They have been doing it since the beginning of 2014. Russian President Vladimir Putin sees Western countries as initiators and instigators of the conflict in Ukraine. An armed coup, that's where it all started. We were forced to protect the population of Crimea, and this way or another we ended up supporting Donbass. They pretend they had nothing to do with it. They started it, and now it's shipping millions of shells and weapons to Ukraine. Putin has long blamed the West, specifically the United States, for the coup in Ukraine in 2014. The Kremlin leader confirmed that he had mentioned this once, adding that the leadership added Ukraine is also responsible for certain mistakes. It's their internal affair, Ukraine's own. But when a coup, at the same time bloodshed, breaks out, it's a completely different story, Putin said. The French Foreign Ministry has called on Russia to revise its agreement with Belarus on March 26 on the deployment of nuclear weapons as having a destabilizing character. France attaches great significance to the commitment to the January 3, 2022 statement on the inadmissibility of a nuclear war and an arms race, which was approved by both Vladimir Putin and all the heads of state and government of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. It calls on Russia to demonstrate responsibility, which is expected from a state possessing nuclear weapons, and revise this destabilizing agreement, it said. According to the French Foreign Ministry, the decision represents an erosion in the international architecture of arms control and strategic stability in Europe in the context of Russia's violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF, as well as the cessation of participation in the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, New START, in February this year. On March 26, Ukraine requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council regarding the announcement of Russian President Vladimir Putin that Moscow will deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. It is a provocative step that undermines the principles of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the international security system, Ukraine's foreign ministry said. Ukraine's foreign ministry also called on the Belarusian people to prevent this, saying that the plan to support Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko will have dire consequences for the future of Belarus itself. On the same day, Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya said Russia's deployment plan completely contradicts the will of the Belarusian people and would make the country a target of retaliation. Ukraine has called on Britain, China, the US and France, as permanent members of the Security Council, to take effective actions to counter the nuclear threat. However, the opening of the meeting remains uncertain, as Russia is also a permanent member of the Council and can veto any proposed resolution or action. On March 26, advisor to the President of Ukraine Mikhailo Podolyak said that Russian President Vladimir Putin's statement about the placement of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus shows that he is afraid of losing. On Twitter, Podolyak wrote, "Putin is too predictable. Making a statement about placing tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus means that he is admitting that he is afraid of losing, and all he can do is use tactical nuclear weapons to threaten him." Threaten. Podolyak added, Monday. He committed another crime once again, which is a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Belarus, located to the west of Russia and bordering Ukraine to the north, is one of Moscow's closest allies. Belarus assisted Russia in conducting a special military operation in February 2022, allowing the Kremlin's troops to enter the country from the north. Earlier, in an interview broadcast on March 25 on Russia's state television channel Russia 24, Putin stated that the placement of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus would not violate non-proliferation agreements. Nuclear weapons. He said Moscow has delivered an Iskander short-range missile system, a device that can be armed with a nuclear or conventional warhead, to Belarus. The U.S. State Department later said it would continue to monitor the impact of Russia's plans to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, but would not adjust its nuclear weapons strategy. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel said, "We see no reason to adjust our nuclear strategy nor any indication that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons." Andriy Demchenko, spokesman for Ukraine's border guard, said on March 26 that the number of Russian troops stationed in Belarus has now decreased to more than 4,000. The figures given by Dymchenko are less than half of the number of Russian troops recorded in Belarus in January. At the time, Russia deployed 10,000 troops near Belarus border with Ukraine, raising fears of a new invasion of Ukraine from the north. According to Dymchenko, the Russian troops still in Belarus are mainly tasked with military training, while the rest have been transferred to Russia, to the front lines in eastern Ukraine to prepare for offensive operations. Upcoming work. Moscow has not yet responded to this information. According to Defense News, the German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall recently wanted to build a factory in Ukraine that can produce up to 400 Panther Kf-51 main battle tanks annually. However, some infantry warfare experts say the plan is flawed, pointing to pitfalls ranging from site security to supply chain risks. Rheinmetall's CEO Armin Paperger, who has discussed the topic with German media several times since the beginning of this year, said the company is in talks with Ukraine about the possibility of investing €200 million in a house. Brand new tank engine that can equip Kiev's armored forces. Rheinmetall spokesman Jan-Philipp Weiswang confirmed there were plans but declined to provide specific details. Some elements of the proposal have left experts skeptical. According to Mark Kanchan, senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, the proposed tank production rate seems unrealistically high. To produce 400 complete tanks per year is a huge effort. He said the US currently produces about 100 units a year. In contrast, the Ukrainian army totaled about 800 men before the conflict broke out. Assuming the tank has a lifespan of about 20 years, then we only need to buy about 40 tanks per year, not 400. Kanchan added that using €200 million to invest is too low. Meanwhile, Marta Keep, a senior defense analyst at RAND Corporation, said prefabricating parts in Germany and performing final assembly and testing in Ukraine would bring risks associated with transporting sensitive goods to a war zone. On the contrary, building the car entirely in Ukraine could alleviate these difficulties and in the long run could also benefit other European countries. The production of Panther in Ukraine means that Germany, along with other European countries, will not have to hand over key equipment in their inventory to Ukraine, thus maintaining its defense and deterrence capabilities, she noted. Their own, while at the same time supporting the country. Overall, production of Panther in Ukraine will likely require approval from the German government, but this would be a move that carries political risks for Berlin. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said that Ukraine might start negotiations to join the European Union, EU, this summer. According to the leader, Ukraine will become one of the EU countries directly influenced by the US. Speaking on local RTV Pink, Vučić said, Ukraine will hardly win a white war militarily, that is almost impossible. According to the leader, decisions will be made in Brussels and Kiev around this June on Ukraine's negotiations and EU accession. Ukraine applied to join the European Union shortly after Russia launched a special military operation in the country at the end of February last year and was granted official candidate status 4 months later. According to President Vučić, Ukraine's membership of the EU will benefit the US, which is seeking to create a new bloc within Europe. The leader said the group would include Poland, the Baltic states and Ukraine. If there is more Romania, this will be the strongest group in Europe and directly influenced by the US, Vučić said. As Europe is about to be redrawn, the Serbian president said that the country the leader noted that Serbia is having an increasingly close relationship with Hungary. Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán has always been a figure in the media attention in recent times when repeatedly blaming his Western allies for arming Ukraine. Orlando Bloom, the Goodwill Ambassador of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, is known for his roles in the movies Pirates of the Caribbean or Lord of the Rings, had a face-to-face meeting with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in Kiev on March 26. The 46-year-old British actor gave the Ukrainian leader praise. He reached across the table, touched Zelensky's chest, and said, "You have a warm heart." In his nightly address that was broadcast afterwards, President Zelensky said of his meeting with the UNICEF ambassador, "We discussed rebuilding the country, the school infrastructure." Ambassador Orlando Bloom understands well how the current ongoing conflict has brought havoc to Ukraine and how the world has worked to prevent this disaster and rebuild Ukraine after the war. "I am very grateful for this help." This is Orlando Bloom's first trip to Ukraine since 2016. Also within the framework of the visit, the actor also went to a children's center in the city. Since the outbreak of conflict, UNICEF has set up centers called Spilno across Ukraine to support children and their families, with at least 500,000 people being helped through this project. According to the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, as of March 26, at least 465 children have been killed in the country's 13-month conflict. The managing director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Kristalina Georgieva recently said that China will account for about a third of global growth in 2023 thanks to the economic recovery. Speaking at the 2023 China Development Forum in Beijing, Georgieva said the solid economic recovery in China are green shoots in the world economy. In the context of the world currently affected by the wound from the pandemic, economic and geographic fragmentation and financial stability risks. Georgieva added, "Fortunately, the situation in the world economy is not all bad. We can see some green shoots in the economy today, including in China. Here, the economy is recovering strongly. In January we also forecast GDP growth of 5.2% this year, up 2 percentage points from the 2022 rate. Boosting growth will be driven by a recovery in private consumption as the economy reopens and activities normalize. This is important for China and also important for the world, as the country's strong recovery is expected to account for a large share of global growth this year," Georgieva noted. Over the weekend, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy said lawmakers will move to enact legislation to address concerns related to the social network TikTok while accusing China of holding the right to access data into this application. Last week, TikTok's CEO had to answer questions from the U.S. House of Representatives during a 5-hour hearing. Later, on Twitter, McCarthy wrote, "House will move forward with legislation to protect Americans from China-related technology applications." During the hearing, TikTok CEO Shou Zi Chu asserted that there was no way the Chinese government had access to TikTok's user data. However, Republican Congressman Neil Dunn mentioned that some employees of TikTok's parent company ByteDance had unauthorized access to user data and were subsequently fired. Dunn also asked if ByteDance was acting as a spy. CEO Chu responded, "I don't think spy is the right word to describe TikTok's operations. The case of the above employees has been investigated." In a Twitter post, McCarthy said, "It is disturbing that TikTok CEO cannot be honest and admit what we already know. It is disturbing that TikTok CEO cannot be honest and admit what we already know." TikTok also said it signed a $1.5 billion contract with U.S. technology group Oracle Corp to protect U.S. user data. House Select Committee Chairman Mike Gallagher told ABC Radio that Chu's appearance in the U.S. Congress did not ease the situation but also led congressmen to move forward with legislation against TikTok. On March 26, one of the largest banks in the U.S., First Citizens Bancshares, negotiated the first round to buy Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, after the company declared bankruptcy. The information was just published by Reuters. The startup Silicon Valley Bank has suddenly collapsed, causing banks in the U.S. to fear a crisis as bad as 2008. The U.S. government announced that it will work to prevent the collapse of SVB affect the market. Another source told Bloomberg that First Citizens Bank will soon reach an agreement to take over SVB through the U.S. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC. First Citizens and the FDIC did not comment on this information. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on March 26 decided to fire Defense Minister Yoav Gallant after the official publicly opposed the government's plan to overhaul the justice system. "The security of the State of Israel has been and will always be my life's mission," Gallant said on Twitter after the announcement of the dismissal of Prime Minister Netanyahu's office. Former Shin Bet security agency director Avi Dichter is expected to replace Gallant. Prime Minister Netanyahu's dismissal of Defense Minister Gallant has sparked new large-scale protests across Israel. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets to protest overnight. Notably, a crowd gathered outside Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem. Some extremists tried to break through the security fence. In a joint statement, opposition leaders Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz said, "National security cannot be viewed as a card on the political chessboard. Prime Minister Netanyahu crossed that red line." They also urged members of Mr. Netanyahu's Likud party not to engage in undermining national security. Israel's President Isaac Herzog once warned that the country was in the midst of disaster amid massive protests that drew hundreds of thousands of people against plans to overhaul the judiciary. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu insisted the bill was necessary to restore balance between the elected government and the judiciary. Coming to international sports movements, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland's women's ice snooker team defeated their Norwegian opponent in the World Final in Sweden on March 26, thereby successfully defending its crown. Switzerland entered the fifth half with a 2-0 lead. However, Norwegian athlete Kristen Skaslian brought the match back to the starting line when he scored 2 points for his team. Switzerland took the lead in the seventh round but were quickly held to a draw after that. In the ninth inning, Switzerland created a point advantage thanks to Alina Pizza's goal. Meanwhile, the Norwegian athletes continuously missed opportunities to equalize and lost with the final result 6-3. Winning over Norway, Switzerland's women's curling team won the championship, extending their unbeaten streak for the past 35 years. In the third quarter match, Canada beat host Sweden 8-5 to win the world bronze medal. On March 26, the Russian men's football team won 2-0 against Iraq at the stadium in the city of St. Petersburg. This is the first match of Russian players at home since November 2021. Before that, Russia's male players had 4 friendlies, all away from home. In particular, Russia beat Kyrgyzstan 2-1 in September last year and then drew Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Iran. Football and other sports of Russia and its ally Belarus have been banned from international tournaments after Russia launched a special military operation in Ukraine. Currently, a number of international sports federations are gradually easing the ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes, allowing them to return to competition. Notably, earlier this year, the International Olympic Committee, IOC, publicly announced its intention to allow athletes from these two countries to participate in the 2024 Paris Olympics. However, this move was met with strong opposition from Ukraine and its Western allies. Meanwhile, the Ukraine team on the same day had a guest match at Wembley Stadium, London, UK in the Euro 2024 qualifying framework. Before the match, the fans of the two teams were covered. The whole stadium is decorated with the Ukrainian flag with 2 distinctive colors, yellow and blue, to show strong support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. Regarding the progress of the match, the difference in strength, teachers and coaches Ruslan Rotan could not create a surprise before the Three Lions. With an easy 2-0 victory over Ukraine thanks to the goals of Harry Kane and Bukayo Saka, the England team won after 2 matches, maintaining the top position of Group C with 6 points. The UK is coming to Malta. The final part of today's program will be the story of Afghan girls participating in online English courses organized by educational institutes. This practice has grown in popularity as Afghan girls and women are banned from school by the Taliban government. The following is the sharing of Sophia, an Afghan schoolgirl who is going through this period of ban. The Taliban have closed schools for girls, denying them access to higher education and working at NGOs banned. Afghan schoolgirls have access to learning through online form. Sophia, 22 years old, is one of them. Sophia participated in Rumi Academy's online course. The school says the number of girls enrolled in online learning has increased from 50 to more than 50 after the Taliban take power in 2021, but not many are as lucky as Sophia. Rumi Academy said it had to refuse to accept hundreds of students, as 97% of Afghanistan's population lived below the poverty line. As a result, not many people can afford to buy computers, internet packages, and meet other requirements of an online class. The school also cannot expand the teaching system because there is not enough funding for teachers and facilities to teach online. The Taliban does not currently ban the internet. They also allow girls to be homeschooled. However, the quality of the internet connection in Afghanistan is still limited. Our main concerns are electricity and internet connectivity. If one day the power is completely cut off in Afghanistan, that will be a serious problem for us. Despite the challenges, Sophia said Afghan women have become resilient to problems after years of civil war in the country. They are ready to deal with any difficulty, no matter how bad the situation.